I get it, you want to draw like Kim Jung-gi, me too. But this video ain't gonna help you get there. Instead, what I can do is share with you a few things that I know about the brush pen to hopefully help you get started on your journey to drawing like Kim Jung-gi. You're never gonna draw like him, you're just not that good. Okay, let's get into it. The first thing is to understand the tool. There are a few variations to the brush pen, but they are essentially the same thing. Here I have a conventional brush pen. There's a tip here just like a regular old brush, except that it's attached to a cartridge that's filled with ink. It's basically a lazy person's way of drawing with a brush. So there's no reason why you can't use a regular old paintbrush or calligraphy brush and just dip it in like a pot of ink and draw with that instead. They're basically the same thing. Another option is a water brush. It's basically the same as a brush pen, but instead of a cartridge filled with ink, there's this empty barrel here that you can fill with ostensibly water, but you could fill this with ink, like fountain pen ink, and just use it like a regular old brush pen. The nice thing about the water brush is that you can change it to, you can put whatever you want in here in whatever color you want. And also you can put black ink in here and then dilute it with water, and then you get a gray brush pen. Just like a regular paintbrush, different brush pens come with different stiffnesses. The softer the brush is, the more sensitive it is to pen pressure. I'm using the Pentel color brush, although a lot of artists prefer the Pentel pocket brush, which I find to be a little bit too soft and sensitive for my personal taste, and it's quite expensive. I would recommend you try out different pens just to see what fits you the best. Another thing to note is that the bristles of a brush pen will wear out and fray over time. So even though you can keep refilling this with ink and buying new cartridges, over time this brush will start to wear out and you will have to buy a new one. That being said, don't throw old brushes away because they can come in handy for shading. But we'll talk about that later. So let's talk about drawing with a brush pen. If you're used to drawing with a pen or pencil, basically any tool with a uniform line weight, well, this is going to be very different. The key to drawing with a brush pen is pressure control, how hard you push down on the paper. This will take a long time to master and you will mess up a lot, but despite the brush pen being quite a difficult tool to draw with, it's also quite forgiving. The first thing you want to do is test out the range of line weights you're able to draw with. That means going in with as light a touch as possible and then pressing as hard as you can without damaging the brush. This gives you an idea of how thin and thick your lines can be. The next thing to do is draw lines as thinly and as lightly as you can. A good way to do this is by using ghost strokes. No, it's not a pawn parody of The Ring. Ghost strokes are when you hover your hand over the paper and mime the line you are about to make. You're not actually drawing anything, you're just acting out the motion of drawing the line. Then slowly lower your pen closer to the paper until ink starts to appear. It may not even feel like you're touching the paper because you're only making contact with just the tip. God, so many innuendos. This is something that you want to get used to because you're going to be doing that a lot for your thin, fine details. Now, most of your line art is going to be somewhere in the middle. As far as how to control your line weight, a good tip is to draw with your arm and not your wrist. This is a good tip for line control in general, but especially so for brush pens. By using your bigger, stabler muscles in your arm, your line art will become less jittery. Another thing to think about is your stroke being part of a much longer line. So try to picture it beginning way before you touch the paper and ending way after you lift the pen off the page. This sort of visualization is useful for longer lines that require big sweeping motions. It also helps when thinking about applying pressure. So try and think about your pen moving in an arc which sweeps down into the paper and then back up. This brings us to line quality, which is probably the main reason why we're all so attracted to brush pens in the first place. Because of the sensitivity of the brush pen, there are so many different variations that we can get out of it. So let's go over the three main types. The first are uniform lines. These are pretty self-explanatory. They don't change in line weight throughout the entire stroke. There's not much to say about it, so let's move on. Thick to thin. These kinds of strokes are really good at conveying movement and energy. It's really good for stuff like flowing hair or swinging movements. You can either go slowly by pressing down on the page heart and then slowly lifting up as you are reaching the end of your stroke, or you can go really quickly and just flick it and give it this really aggressive look. You can also press down and let the brush fray a bit to give you this dry brush look at the end of the stroke. Third one is the tapering stroke. That's when you have a thin line at the beginning that goes thicker towards the center and then tapers back off towards the end. This is really good for drawing organic forms, so things like curvy and round shapes. So for example, the human body, or a flowing shape like fabric, or even tree branches. The key, in my opinion, to a good looking brush pen is having a large variety of different line weights. Too often I see beginner brush pen users try their hardest to be as robotic as they can and get the same line weight throughout the drawing, and then it ends up looking quite flat and dead. That's not the point of the brush pen. I say you lean into it, play into the strengths of the brush pen. So have big swoopy lines for your large forms, and then be delicate and thin with your fine details. With the right distribution of line weights, the drawing can end up looking incredibly balanced and organic and natural. Now on to the matter of shading. What makes a brush pen really cool is its high contrast. You can either block it in with pure black, or you can also just shade and hatch like you would a normal pen. This is where one of those old frayed brushes come in. You can switch to one of those when you're shading and get this really dry, frayed brush look. And I think that's really attractive. It kind of reminds me of these old Chinese and Japanese ink paintings. You can also emulate that same effect with a newer brush. You just have to make sure that the bristle and the brush is dry enough, and you can just press it and spread it out a little bit so that you can get that look. But it's a lot easier if you just have an old frayed brush lying around. Alternatively, you can also dilute your ink in some water, like this water brush here, and then you have gray ink, and then you can just shade with gray ink, and now you have different tonalities in your drawing. Now, there isn't any reason why you can't do a combination of any of these three techniques, and I think the best ones are when you just get the right mix of these techniques. So play around and try out something, and this is how you develop your style as a brush pen artist. Now let's talk about some common mistakes or pitfalls that I see beginner brush pens run into. We've talked about this a little bit with trying to make every single line weight uniform, so that's one of them. And there's only really one other one, and that is trying to become too perfect with the brush pen. That's not what the brush pen is for. One of the big mistakes I see is that beginners always try to overwork a line. So they put one stroke down and it's a little bit imperfect, it's a little bit wonky, and maybe the line weight isn't what they want it to be. So they go over it again, and then they go over it again to try and fix it, and then and the line ends up looking too overworked. The drawing as a whole ends up looking too overworked. A brush pen drawing looks good because it almost feels effortless. So even if it is just an imperfect stroke, leave it. It can be wonky, but in the grand scheme of things, if every stroke is wonky, none of them are wonky. So leave it. Don't touch it. Just let it be. So right about now, I can feel you stressing out. Like there's the line weight, and then there's balance, which kind of stroke to use, and then different kinds of shading. Like there's so much to think about. That kind of control and understanding only comes with time. The beauty of a brush pen is that it is imperfect. It's weird and inconsistent, and you feel the human touch behind the drawing. That's why we like it so much. You can try to become the perfect ultimate brush pen master and have perfect line control and balance, or you can embrace the mistakes and accept them for what they are. I'm partial towards the latter. Thank you for watching.